Rule of law under God is acknowledged.
An informed patriot is what we want.
Welcome to American Family Radio's Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio.
Muscular Christianity.
Where we relentlessly explore the intersection of truth and politics.
The trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so.
Now, here's your host, Brian Fisher.
And good Monday to you, everyone. Fred Jackson sitting in for the vacationing Brian Fisher today. Found out last night was going to be filling in, and I started wondering what are we going to talk about today. It's the first Monday in June, and it could be a quiet news day. Well, the United States Supreme Court took care of that this morning, so we're going to be talking a whole bunch. Joining me in studio, Jeff Reed, Rob Gardner's here, and yes, the United States Supreme Court issuing a decision this morning, a decision that we have been waiting for. If you've been listening to American Family Radio over the last couple of years at least, you know the Christian freedoms have been under attack in the wake of the Obergefell decision in 2015 legalizing homosexual marriage. And homosexual activists have used it in cases such as the Kleins in Oregon, Christian bakers. They didn't want to bake a cake for a homosexual wedding, and they get taken to court and basically shut down their business. Bernell Stutzman, a florist in Washington State, much the same thing. Didn't want to make service flowers for a homosexual wedding, taken to court, and that case is still ongoing. And then there was Jack Phillips, who is a baker in Colorado. And in that case, it was Masterpiece Cake Shop is the name of his cake shop. Much along the lines of the Kleins in Oregon, did not want to bake a cake for a homosexual wedding. And the state went to work on Jack Phillips, and with the Colorado Civil Rights Commission out there saying he had no right to deny that his religious rights did not trump the rights of these homosexuals to demand of him that he bake a cake for their homosexual wedding. Well, that case was heard before the Supreme Court several months ago. Now, we were expecting the decision sometime this month. We just weren't expecting it so early in the month, but they did render that decision this morning. It was a 7-2 decision in favor of Jack Phillips. Now, that's pretty exciting, and a lot of people are very pleased it went that way. Justices Ginsburg and Sotomayor, only two dissenting judges. The seven others voting with and writing for the majority was Justice Kennedy, who's often seen as the dividing line in this United States Supreme Court. However, there are cautions in this decision, and to help us work our way through this decision today, and it's a lengthy one, is Brad Dacus of the Pacific Justice Institute. Brad, welcome from California.
Oh, it's great to be on the program. Thank you.
All right, Brad. I think a lot of celebrating over this decision. And so take us through it. What basically was the decision? Kennedy wrote for the majority. What did he have to say about the Jack Phillips case?
His basic holding was that it was fairly narrow, very narrow, in that it ruled that the state of Colorado's enforcement of this anti-discrimination law was one that was biased and hostile and discriminatory against Christians, and had a different set of standards and review for people who had different ideologies, pro-LGBT, etc. So they looked at the application of it and said, you can't discriminate against someone because of their religious beliefs and then treat other people differently who have objections to the same kind of action or a similar action. So that was what it was premised upon. The second premise, though, was dealing with the intent. They even cited some of the statements made by those on the commission in Colorado. The language that they used showed open bigotry and demise towards Christians and people with Christian beliefs. And they use that very clearly as coming to their determination that Mr. Phillips was unjustly treated, and that this law was not being applied neutrally as it needs to be in order to stand up to scrutiny with regards to his religious objections.
Yeah, let me read the comment from Justice Kennedy in the summary. And here's the objection that Justice Kennedy and the 6 other justices had problems with. Now, we're talking about this Human Rights Commission, the Colorado Civil Rights Commission. In dealing with the Jack Phillips case, Justice Kennedy says, as the record shows, some of the commissioners at the commission's formal public hearings endorsed the view that religious beliefs cannot legitimately be carried into the public sphere on commercial domain, disparaged Phillips' faith as despicable and characterized it as merely rhetorical, and compared his invocation of his sincerely held religious beliefs to defenses of slavery and the Holocaust. No commissioners objected to the comments, nor were they mentioned in the later state court ruling or disavowed in the briefs filed here. The comments thus cast doubt on the fairness and impartiality of the commission's adjudication of Phillips' case. So, correct me if I'm wrong, Brad. I think what these justices are saying is that these commissioners went into this hearing with a bias against Jack Phillips' personal religious beliefs. Is that a reasonable assessment?
Right, and that's what they hung their hat on in this 7-2 decision, was that he wasn't treated fairly and equally. They treated him in a hostile manner because of his beliefs. And so far as the court was concerned, at this juncture, it stopped there, and they ruled in favor of Mr. Phillips. But there's so much more that they left on the table that is yet to be resolved, and it's going to have to be resolved in the future, and they acknowledge that in their opinion.
All right, let's talk about what was left on the table. What do you mean by that?
Well, first is whether or not a conscientious objector with someone with a free exercise, religious freedom stake, inherently trumps others who want to have goods and services that may violate those religious beliefs. For example, in the future Baker case, very well we could see a situation where the case comes back up again, and the Supreme Court could say, okay, the law was, the commission was fair, they assessed it fairly, they didn't have open bias and bigotry against Christians, and they determined that having a religious conviction isn't sufficient grounds to deny someone these services. If that's the case, then it would be an adverse opinion. So that's real important. Whether or not his religious beliefs in and of itself is sufficient to protect him from having to compromise those faiths and having to make a wedding cake or do something else that is clearly in violation of his faith. That's still up in the air. They held the commission can't be open bigots and grossly discriminatory against people of faith and their religious beliefs, but they still kept open the question of the extent to which the free exercise rights under the First Amendment protect someone from having to compromise their freedom, their religious convictions.
Yeah, so it almost sounds to me like the justices were saying, if you guys on this Civil Rights Commission had not said these things in public hearings about comparing the Phillips case to justification of slavery, justification of the Holocaust, then this decision could have gone the other way.
Yeah, and that's what the majority said. It could have gone. It wouldn't necessarily have gone the other way, but it could have gone the other way. And once again, the other thing they looked at also was the application of it was discriminatory. Okay. There are other cases.
Brad, yeah. We're going to talk about these other cases. Just hang in with us. We got to take a break here. We're going to come right back in a few minutes. We want to continue on these other cases and potential this decision has.
Okay, here's the big question with regard to any big decision. Is this going to work? Well, if you've heard about MediShare, a brilliant way of sharing healthcare costs, you may have wondered that, yeah, but does it actually work? So did Dr. Stuart Hoover, who initially joined to save a lot of money. The typical family saves about $500 a month. Stuart saved even more.
When we first joined MediShare, we were immediately going from a little over $1,600 a month down to $460 basically a month.
So that's wonderful, but then his wife needed emergency surgery. The bills added up to $160,000.
So we were seeing the bills coming in, and then the bills were being paid. Portions were being shared, and the end result of this is this bill was taken care of.
Yes, MediShare works, and it's so easy to get your questions answered. Why not? You can call right now. Just hit **345. That's **345, **345.
A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed man. My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Minute. Recently, tech titans have sought to minimize the access people have to conservative content. But what we've seen so far is just the beginning. At an off-the-record event where the usual regressive media suspects were gathered, Mark Zuckerberg announced Facebook will dial up the intensity of its efforts to minimize access to, quote, controversial political content, end quote. Any wonder as to what type of content Zuckerberg deems to be controversial?
Listen each weekday from 5 to 6 p.m. Central for the Hamilton Corner with Abraham Hamilton III, Public Policy Analyst for the American Family Association. This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher on American Family Radio.
And welcome back to Focal Point. Fred Jackson sitting in for Brian Fisher today with me in the studio. Rob Gardner, Jeff Reed, and joining us on the line from sunny California, we assume, is Brad Dacus of the Pacific Justice Institute. Brad, we're talking about this Supreme Court decision today with regards to the Jack Phillips. He's the baker from Colorado. Supreme Court ruling 7-2 today in favor of Jack Phillips, but as we have been noting, a very narrow decision. The justices of the United States Supreme Court seem to be upset with the attitude of the Colorado Civil Rights Commission in this. So that's why we're calling it a narrow decision. So what are the ramifications of this? If this is the major objection the Supreme Court justices had today, what do you see the ACLUs of this, or the Human Rights Campaign, the homosexual activists, what do they do now with these other cases that are still pending out there?
Well, for some of them, it's the concrete's already been poured, and what's in the record is in the record. But moving forward, I think this is what it tells local governments is that if you're going to be discriminatory and prejudiced towards people because of their faith, you better hide it. You better not say it publicly on the record, number one. Number two, you better go out of your way to look objective in how you're enforcing it. This commission let off a pro-LGBT bakery who refused to make a wedding cake for a pro-traditional marriage wedding cake theme. So they need to be less obvious as to their discriminatory attitudes and bias. That's what it says right now. But it also sends a signal, though, clearly to for other cases. We have a number of cases I think are going to be impacted by this at Pacific Justice Institute, and those are cases where the courts are going to be looking at, okay, are there real free exercise grounds here? Those free exercise religious objections are ones that we need to take seriously. They can't just be immediately discarded like the two justices on the court, Sotomayor and Ginsburg, tried to say that you can just quickly throw it away. It doesn't matter. And that's a positive in that it will give a little bit more of a hesitation and scrutiny to throw away people because of their religious beliefs and convictions.
Yeah, I'm wondering too. I've read before, and you're a lawyer, but I've read before that sometimes justices in making these kinds of decisions kind of read the tea leaves of our culture. Do you see there's a backlash that has developed from the conservative side of things? When you have all these cases where you have the leftists basically trying to put people out of business because of their Christian beliefs, do you think that has a sway on some of the thinking? I mean, the decision today was 7-2. And so do you think the meter moved a little bit to the right on this today in this decision?
It did a little bit. You have the two that have no respect for religious freedom or Christians or people of faith, Sotomayor and Ginsburg. Then you have the other two on the left that went with the decision, that their opinion is when the government's openly bigoted and hostile towards Christians and discriminatory, blatant like this, they'll win. Otherwise, it's obvious they would lean towards letting LGBT trump religious freedom and beliefs if it in any way disagreed with the LGBT discrimination statute. So they can't be counted on. But it does, the other five justices, we have, the other at least three that are real solidly for religious freedom, free speech. The Chief Justice kept stayed low on this one and just siding with the majority opinion. So at the end of the day, this sends a signal that says you cannot be openly, blatantly discriminatory against people because of their faith. People's religious beliefs and convictions must be taken under consideration. How deep that consideration goes, how much that's going to be able to trump activist policies that are in direct violation of those beliefs, that has yet to be seen, and the court is very upfront that is going to have to be decided and determined another day. And I think this, if anything, this should be a reminder of how important this upcoming election is in November, because really the people in the end will probably be making the final decision on how this all turns out, because Justice Kennedy will either be stepping down this summer or next summer. By the time the next case goes before the Supreme Court and this makes it all the way up again, there will likely be someone new on the Supreme Court who will be appointed by President Trump, and whether or not that's someone for religious freedom or is not sensitive to religious freedom is determinative on who's controlling the U.S. Senate, and that will be decided decisively this November. So, because the Senate is the one who has to approve those appointments to the Supreme Court, and depending on who's in control of the Senate, that's in the end going to be the final decider. So, at the end of the day, it's sort of interesting. While we're looking at the Supreme Court, at the end of the day, it's really going to be inevitably decided by the voters this November, based on which direction the Supreme Court takes.
Yes, because as you mentioned, Kennedy, the rumors have been going around for at least a year now that he is ready to step down. Breyer is, in his 80s, I believe?
Right. I think he's 81, yeah.
And, of course, people keep talking about Ginsburg as well. So, yeah, elections have consequences, and who controls the Senate basically then controls the United States Supreme Court for many years to come. So, elections do have consequences, and that's something to think about. Now, you were mentioning there are some other cases that you have been dealing with, which this decision today may have some ramifications. And one is a church that's battling a local ordinance in Wisconsin. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, this case in Wisconsin, we're dealing with a town called Dupere, Wisconsin, and Dupere has a local ordinance they passed which tells employers, including churches and a Christian radio station, that they have to not discriminate against an employee just because the employee's same-sex sexual relationship or same-sex sexual marriage or these kinds of activities. So it's a huge blow to religious freedom to tell, say, a church, say First Baptist of Dupere, that you can hire who you want, but if they're engaging in same-sex sexual conduct or same-sex sexual marriage and these kinds of activities, you have to keep them on your staff. Even a ministry staff position, you can't let them go. That is very disturbing and a direct affront to religious freedom. Well, this case definitely legitimizes the free exercise rights as needing to be considered when evaluating anti-discrimination statutes such as this. And that's a definite nudge in our direction for this case.
All right, so I think we can celebrate for today the 7-2 decision by the United States Supreme Court in the Jack Phillips Masterpiece Bakers case. However, the battle is far from over. Is that a good assessment of this?
I think that's a perfect assessment. It's a victory, it's a battle, but it's a small win, and the big battle, the Gettysburg, if you will, is yet to come.
All right. Thank you so much, Brad Dacus of the Pacific Justice Institute, and we'll stay tuned to how the cases that you're dealing with and how those go in the courts as well. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Brad Dacus, terrific organization, Pacific Justice Institute. The Alliance Defending Freedom are the lawyers that were involved in this Jack Phillips case. They released a statement this morning in the wake of the Supreme Court decision. Just want to read that to you. Jack serves all customers. He simply declines to express messages or celebrate events that violate his deeply held beliefs. Creative professionals who serve all people should be free to create art consistent with their convictions without the threat of government punishment. Government hostility toward people of faith has no place in our society. Yet the state of Colorado was openly antagonistic toward Jack's religious beliefs about marriage. The court was right to condemn that. Tolerance and respect for good faith differences of opinion are essential in a society like ours. This decision makes clear that the government must respect Jack's beliefs about marriage. Now, here's the thing to remember, folks. Whether it was Barronelle Stutzman, the florist there in Washington State, Jack Phillips, or the Kleins in Oregon, these people did not refuse to wait on homosexuals. The ADF, the Alliance Defending Freedom, put out about a 5-minute video of Barronelle Stutzman, where the people who took her to court, the homosexuals, she'd known them for years. She'd known them for years. She sold flowers for other occasions that they were involved with. Much the same with Jack Phillips. These are clients that they knew for years. And if they wanted to come in the case of Jack Phillips, and buy a loaf of bread or a pan of chocolate brownies, or they could have even bought a generic wedding cake off the shelf, he would not have objected to that. It was their request that he bake a specific cake which would celebrate or help them celebrate their homosexual wedding. That was the key in all of this, and that is the fight going forward. There's one thing you can depend on today, having watched this now for many years, Jeff, is that the homosexual side will not give up on this.
No.
This is a minor setback for them.
Yeah, and I think it's good that we point out also that Jack Phillips also refused to bake other types of cakes against his conscience. So he wouldn't do ones for bachelor parties, for Halloween, anything that was, he wouldn't do divorce cakes, things like that. So it was not singly a discrimination against one group of people. It was more of a following of his biblical conscience.
Yeah, well,
and that's important.
It's important to remember that. So this comes right down to our constitutional rights to express and live out our Christian beliefs, exactly, whether we can do that in this country. And I think it was Justice Alito in the Obergefell case back in 2015. I think he openly remarked, and he was in the minority, it was a 5-4 decision with Kennedy basically holding sway there in legalizing homosexual marriage in this country. I believe it was Alito who expressed the concern of what this decision could mean for freedoms, for religious freedom in this country. And he was scoffed at the time, you know, that this is not going to happen. Well, he was a prophet. And one thing, the homosexual activists will not give up, because for them it's about discouraging, it's about punishing those who object to the decision that they have made to lead this homosexual lifestyle. All right, you're listening to Focal Point. Fred Jackson sitting in for Brian today. We have much more ahead, much more political news ahead. And there's another case I wanted to talk a little bit about that is similar to this. This comes out of East Lansing, Michigan. We'll talk a little bit more when we come back on this Monday edition of Focal Point right here on American Family Radio. Back in a few minutes.
This is Dr. Richard Lamb, president of Southern Evangelical Seminary. Welcome to Bringing Every Thought Captive. This week we commemorate the 51st anniversary of the Six-Day War between Israel and her Arab enemies, Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, in June of 1967. Some have asked, weren't the Israelis the aggressor? No, they were not. In May 1967, Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser mobilized Egyptian armed forces in the Sinai. Nasser also signed a mutual defense pact with Jordan, whose armed forces were put under Egyptian command. It was clear that Egypt, Jordan, and Syria were preparing an imminent, coordinated attack on Israel from the south, the east, and the north. According to just war theory, followed by most Christians for almost 2 millennia, for a war to be just, it must be defensive. However, this does not mean you have to wait to be attacked. If you believe your enemy is preparing to attack you, you are justified in defending yourself by attacking first, especially when you have an enemy that says that their goal is to drive you into the sea. The Israelis did attack first and scored a spectacular victory over their enemies in just 6 days, rewriting the map of the Middle East. My father was with the U.S. Navy task force that left Pearl Harbor to reinforce Wake Island a few days before the Japanese attack in December of 1941. I promise you, had they encountered the Japanese fleet operating under radio silence less than 100 miles from Pearl Harbor, they would have considered it an act of war, and they would not have waited for the Japanese to launch their planes at Pearl Harbor before they attacked the Japanese fleet. For more information about Southern Evangelical Seminary, or about this subject and others, go to ses.edu. This is Richard Land.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher
on American Family Radio.
Listen to the audio podcast or download today's program at afr.net. You can also read Brian Fisher's columns at afa.net.
afa.net.
And welcome back to Focal Point on this Monday. Fred Jackson sitting in for vacationing Brian Fisher. Been talking about this Supreme Court decision today involving Christian baker Jack Phillips from Colorado. A Supreme Court decision in his favor today, a 7-2 decision, but a narrow decision with the Supreme Court justices, the 7, basically being concerned with the open hostility that the Human Rights Commission there in Colorado had towards Jack Phillips.
Yeah, Brett, before we go too far into this segment, I just want to you to know that Facebook Live is a great way to get real-time responses and feedback from people, and we encourage people to do that, of course. But through Facebook Live, I've learned something that maybe Jack Phillips, if he wasn't so busy today, might be baking another cake. Do you know anything about that?
Baking another cake?
Yeah, a lot of people on Facebook Live saying it's your birthday today.
Really?
Yeah. Well, I guess you would know about it if it was.
Yeah, very clever of you, Jeff. Yeah, you see, that's my birthday today.
Happy birthday.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm
awesome.
Edging up there, a whole 64 today.
Awesome.
But I feel blessed.
Amen.
God has given me good health and still love coming to work every day.
Yes, you do.
Been involved with this for about 40 years now, and it's just a great blessing.
How did you come here? I mean, how did you actually become a part of AFR?
I drove here. No, I know what you mean. No, I was involved with public broadcasting in Canada for many years, and surprise, surprise, things got so liberal with the way the media was going. The secular media up there was a national corporation, and I just knew in my heart that I could not stay there. I could not be part of an agenda that was so anti-Christian, and had a good job. I was in Vancouver, British Columbia, which has been voted as one of the most beautiful cities in the world, so it was a very nice location. And was the news director over a province-wide news service there, radio news service. But that's not what life is all about. It's not about reaching a certain status. We're here for a purpose as Christians, and that's to serve the Lord. And so what happened was I I think it was 1996. I got really frustrated with how things were going. When I started out with the organization, they were very strict. I was taught by BBC journalists, and it was keep your own opinion out of the stories. And if we see your opinion in this, that story is not going to go on the air. That totally changed over that 17 years. In fact, they were advocating point of view journalism. Everybody has an opinion, they said, so why try to hide it? Just put your opinion in the news story. There's a place on the air for opinions of people, but advertise it as an opinion. Do not advertise it as a news piece. So anyway, what happened is my wife and I had met at Baptist Bible College in Springfield, Missouri. And so I called down to our former pastor in Springfield, Missouri, and asked, about Christian radio. What do you know about Christian radio in the United States? And he said, well, there's an organization out of Mississippi that has just opened a station in Springfield, Missouri, American Family Radio. Gave me the number for there and called there, and he said, yeah, they're starting a new service down at our home base in Tupelo, Mississippi, and so I called here. This is all in the space of about 20 minutes in an afternoon. I think it was September of 1996. And so called down here, and there was a guy that I talked to here, and I said, I just want to come down and have a look around, because I wasn't that familiar with Christian radio here in the U.S. So he said, sure, come on down. Hung up the phone, went to the yellow pages under airlines, and American Airlines was first. So I called them, and I said, need to go to Jackson, Mississippi from Vancouver. How much is that going to cost? Well, they said, we have a sale that just started today.
Wouldn't you know?
And it was kind of like $280 return. It was ridiculous. Yeah. Booked that, came down. Came in and had a look around at American Family Radio here and what was going on, and was ready to go home. And Dr. Don Wildman caught me in the hallway.
Yeah.
And said, well, come and see me before you go. I said, well, okay. And he sat me down in the office, and he said, would you like to come and work here and be our news director? And so that was, and my work anniversary was just past Friday, June 1st. So that was 21 years ago.
Amen.
And boy, what a ride in that 21 years.
I know us here at AFA and the listeners and now viewers that we've stepped into a lot of the Facebook Live and YouTube have appreciated the level of professionalism that you've given to Christian news on this network. And we just want to say thank you and happy birthday.
Well, thank you so much. Like I said, it's just a real blessing, and I've enjoyed it and continue to enjoy it. That's, Pastor Robert Jeffress, First Baptist Dallas, and he has a program here at American Family Radio. He says retirement is not in the Bible. So I don't plan to retire. I really love what I'm doing. I count it as a privilege, and I think we all do here at American Family Radio, to work in an area that we all enjoy, but in a Christian environment.
Yeah.
The blessings that we have to start each day with a devotion and in God's Word and prayer, and working with Christians, but we're very aware of the battle that's going on, the spiritual battle. 21 years ago when I came, I wasn't aware of just how difficult things were becoming for Christianity. And I remember being here it was 1997, October 1997, on a Saturday evening doing some stories, and that evening, Bill Clinton was still president of the United States. But I think it was one of the television networks was carrying a conference live out of Washington, D.C. It was the Human Rights Campaign, which is the nation's largest homosexual group. Bill Clinton was speaking to the group that night. It was the first time a United States president had spoken to an open homosexual group, history of the country. And I remember him saying to that crowd that was in front of him, I suppose there were about 1,000 people there, he said, how many of you work for my administration? And half the room stood up.
Wow.
That was 1997. That was my introduction to just the level of influence and infiltration of the homosexual movement into our government. And, of course, the battle has continued and intensified. But, often people say, don't you get discouraged by what's going on out there? And you have to keep mindful that God is still in control.
Yeah.
He is. Sometimes, Christians get discouraged about this, but God is still in control. And he's coming back someday, and he will set everything right. But in the meantime, we are to be lights in this very dark world. And we have the privilege of doing that every day here at American Family Radio. And an encouragement to other Christians out there who are on the battlefront too. They are. Brad was just talking about an individual, a church in Wisconsin, a Christian radio station facing this. He represents Christian professors and that, and many others. We've done stories about, remember the fire chief in Atlanta who was fired because of what he said, and I think on his Facebook or Twitter. So there's so many cases out there. We're just blessed to tell their story and come alongside them. So, it's a great joy, and thank you for the birthday wishes, and we just continue on. Just back to our Supreme Court story, if you want to read more about this and an interesting perspective on it all today, if you go to onenewsnow.com, and Michael Brown, Dr. Michael Brown, who is a national syndicated host of Line of Fire radio program, and he has an interesting column there today. He put that out this morning. Did you say Brian had written something today?
He has. Is it up yet, Jeff?
I'll check on that right now.
Okay. Brian is supposed to be on vacation. I said to somebody, I bet he got up this morning when he heard about Supreme Court. Why am I on vacation?
It's now up, so I'm going to go ahead and post that to his Twitter and pin it to the top of his Facebook page.
Okay.
If people want to see that.
Yeah, and Brian, I'm sure, has some great insight.
When he called, he felt pretty, even though he was enjoying his vacation, this news he felt pretty passionate about, and he couldn't help but be a part of it.
I know.
I'm surprised he didn't walk in.
Brian, you're still on vacation, so try to enjoy, and we'll take care of the shop for you as best we can today. There's another somewhat related story I wanted to bring attention to. This involves a farmer up in East Lansing, and the city of East Lansing wasn't allowing him to come and sell his fruits and vegetables at their market. Because he wasn't allowing his farm to be used as a location for homosexual weddings. So there's another example, guys, of this goes well beyond Christian bakers and florists. This is a guy where the city has a non-discrimination policy, and they weren't going to allow him to sell his fruits and vegetables at this marketplace. But I'm told from this story that we had late last week that he planned to show up and sell them anyway, I think the first day for the market, which runs through October, was going to be this past weekend. So we'll try to follow up on that as well. All right, we're going to have another break coming up here in a minute, but want to mention that politically speaking, there's much going on as well. And as Brad was mentioning, we got an election coming up in November, and things are ramping up towards that. Newt Gingrich over the weekend was predicting a red wave in November. Now, many times in the midterms, the party in power often suffers losses. That's the history of whether it's Democrats or Republicans in control. And but we're going to talk a little bit in the last segment for this first hour today about where things are going, what the barometer is saying right now. There's some good news for the Republicans, but also some words of caution that are out there. So we'll talk about that a little bit more when we come back here to this Monday edition of Focal Point. Fred with Jeff and Rob sitting in for Brian today, and much more ahead. We'll get into the politics that are happening right now. Tomorrow is a very important day, primary day across the country. So talking about that when we come back and much more here on Focal Point on this Monday. Right back in a few minutes.
So they asked me to enter my email address. And the next thing I know, I start getting emails from companies I never even knew existed. What's up with that?
Here at the American Family Association, you have our word that we won't give away, sell, or lease your email address to any other organization or company. We're thankful when you take the time to subscribe to AFA Action Alerts, 1 Million Moms, Engage Magazine, or any of our other online newsletters.
Who is God? What is He like? How can we know? Your answer to these questions will impact your worship, discipleship, apologetics, and evangelism. Learn from Ravi Zacharias, Josh McDowell, Chip Ingram, and more than 60 other speakers at Southern Evangelical Seminary's 25th Annual National Conference on Christian Apologetics. It's October 12th and 13th in Charlotte, North Carolina. Get the early bird discount when you register by August 1st at ses.edu.
Are you a responsible person who finds yourself growing deeper and deeper in credit card debt and you're not sure how to fix the problem? Then get ready for a toll-free number that will put you on a path to financial recovery. Trinity Debt Management is a nonprofit organization that will consolidate your accounts into one easy-to-manage monthly payment, put a stop to late fees and over-limit charges, and reduce your interest rates by as much as 60%. You'll save thousands and become debt-free for keeps. It's not a loan. It's a smart way to relieve your stress, meet your obligations, and preserve your self-respect. If your debt has you down, we should talk. Gather up your bills and call this toll-free number for a free, no-obligation debt analysis. 1-800-788-1813. That's 1-800-788-1813. If you're in debt and you need help, call Trinity at 1-800-788-1813.
American Family Radio.
You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
Brian Fisher.
And welcome back to Focal Point. Fred sitting in for Brian today. We're talking about the fact that this is an election year. And we were chatting with Brad Dacus a few moments ago about that Supreme Court decision, and elections have consequences. And coming up this fall, very important election. And one aspect of it is who's going to control the Senate. And we saw the stresses because of the numbers being so close, 50-49 in the Senate right now. And the president has had frustrations with his agenda. But, you know, the Senate controls who gets on our court system. The Democrats have been doing everything possible to slow the process down. And, you know, it's key. As we talked about, the Supreme Court could change according to who controls the Senate after this fall's election. There's the potential because there are many more Democrats up for re-election, Senate-wise, than Republicans this time. So there's potential that the Republicans can increase their margin there. But Newt Gingrich was talking about over the weekend, he feels that unlike a lot of the political pundits out there who have been predicting that perhaps the Democrats will take over the House and maybe even the Senate, he believes with all the good economic news that's happening out there that the Republicans could do well. One of the problems in these midterm elections, many times the governing party, the voters often don't show up. They just stay home, unlike a presidential election. And so the Republicans, I think, are aware of that. You know, it's kind of interesting. The president, he was out again last week at a rally. It was like election year rally. The people that show up for these things.
It's amazing.
Yeah, that's where I think he shines, is out in that. He loves those kinds of environments. And one of his speeches last week, of course, he brought up Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah.
All right? And, you know, Nancy Pelosi, I suppose we can give her marks for hanging in there for many years, but many people think that she has become a liability. And to that point, the Republicans today released an ad featuring Nancy Pelosi. Now, even some Democrats agree, you know, that maybe it's time for Nancy to take some retirement. I think she's late 70s or in that ballpark somewhere?
I would think.
But the not so much her age is the problem, is what she says is the problem. For instance, she's talked about the economy, that so many millions of Americans aren't enjoying a better economy. Well, that just totally defies reality. I mean, we had the latest unemployment figures that came out last Friday. Mm-hmm. They're incredible.
Yep.
The best, it's what, 1970? The unemployment rate for the workers in general, but for African-American workers, for Hispanics, the best that they have been in decades. So, and then you have people getting more in their paycheck because of tax reform that has been brought in.
Which she called crumbs.
Then people, millions of American workers, got bonuses from their companies as a result of that tax reform. And then one of the most recent things is that basically she got upset with President Trump because President Trump referred to these MS-13 terrorist gangs as animals. And she said she was offended by that. Well, that's kind of led to what the Republicans did today. They released this ad drawing attention to Nancy Pelosi, who is defending MS-13 members. Now, keep in mind, these are murderers. These are drug dealers. These are people, in fact, there's two of them that are up on charges right now for murdering a young child, a young girl. They have been involved in part of the initiation into the gang sometimes is murdering someone. These are horrible, horrible people that President Trump has referred to as animals. But Nancy Pelosi was offended by the president calling them animals. That has all resulted in this ad that's been released today. We're going to play it for you.
When the President of the United States says, these aren't people, these are animals, you have to wonder, does he not believe in the spark of divinity, the dignity and worth of every person? We're all God's children. There's a spark of divinity in every person.
We're talking about MS-13. Their motto is rape, torture, kill.
The victim was stabbed more than 100 times, decapitated, dismembered, and his heart was cut out of his chest and then thrown into a pre-dug grave.
The two young men shown here kidnapped, sexually assaulted, and shot a 15-year-old girl, sacrificing her in the name of Satan.
U.S. Marshals say the El Salvador native shot and killed a person in Texas, put the body in the trunk of a car, and lit it on fire. They say that's typical of the MS-13 gang.
Calling people animals is not a good thing.
So there you have it. You know, what Nancy Pelosi had to say, now she'll be defended by the mainstream media, and she was, who, by the way, got the story wrong. They first reported that the president was referring to all immigrants, illegal immigrants, as animals. That's a lie. And they had to come back and correct that, the mainstream media. It may play well, Nancy Pelosi's words, in New York, in Los Angeles, and a few places like that. But Americans understand what the president was saying when he referred to them as animals. And you just heard the media reports of these people who are being arrested. And the president has made it a goal that he's going to make the streets safer. Even in New York, in the east side of New York, the president held a news conference there, I think last week or the week before, drawing attention to what his administration is doing with regards to going after MS-13. But it's one of the problems for the Democrats right now. You have Nancy Pelosi, minority House leader, out there saying these things and dumping on the economy and saying Trump has not done a good job there, and then criticizing the president for calling out these MS-13 members as animals. That just doesn't resonate with the voters. And she, I believe, Jeff and Rob, she's a liability for the Democratic Party.
Oh, yeah. And, I think the Democratic Party in general is being exposed as those who place maybe more or equal value to the perpetrator and thereby lessening the value of life of innocent victims. And that's just not setting well with the American public at all.
And very often with these MS-13 gangs, their violence is perpetrated against members of the Hispanic community. I mean, it's Hispanic families that suffer many times. And although not carte blanche, but many in the Hispanic community have voted for the Democratic Party over time. So Nancy Pelosi, once again, I think is becoming a liability for the Democratic Party. Chuck Schumer on the Senate side also. I mean, you wonder, I know what they say publicly, but when they speak behind closed doors, they've got to be wondering how they can succeed in an environment that is so successful for President Trump.
Mm-hmm.
As I say, the economy doing so well, doing other things, being tough on Iran, the North Korean deal, all of these things that the president has been doing, bringing industry back into this country, those are all positive things that resonate with what we call them normal Americans.
Yeah, lowest black unemployment rate in a very long time.
Yeah.
Those are, I mean, and that's considered a lock for the Democrat Party.
Yeah.
I mean, those things are all chinks in the armor as we go forward.
Yeah. So we'll wait and see, but I think as long as if the economy keeps going the way it is, and I believe it's going to continue through at least this year, there'll be a correction at some point. But if the economy keeps going the way it is, and there's no reason to think it will not, then that's a problem for the Democratic Party. But as the Republicans are warning, the votes still have to happen this fall in order to maintain their control. And so we will see what happens. But I think the Democrats are going to be doing some soul searching, too.
Yeah, what exactly is their platform going forward?
Oh, well, Nancy's one of the key spokesmen out there, Nancy Pelosi. And, I mean, she has said that the tax reform benefits only the top 1%.
So she wants to raise taxes.
She wants to raise taxes. She wants to reform tax reform and bring it back to where it was. That can't go over well with the American family out there. So the Democrats, they do have a problem. And also, I think another problem for the Trump administration are his fellow Republicans many times. They're getting back to business this week. The president, one of his election promises was to build that wall on the southern border and secure, and he's run into problems there. But he's also running into problems with Republicans in the Senate on the tougher stand he wants to take with regards to the North American Free Trade Act and other trade agreements with China and other Europe, that sort of thing, wants to implement tariffs. And he's running up against opposition from his own party on that. President Trump, I don't think any other Republican president could do things the way that this president has been doing. He stands not only in opposition to the mainstream media, he's got that to contend with, he's got the Democrats to contend with, but even members of his own party. And so I have to wonder for those Republicans out there who have shown opposition to him, President Trump, if perhaps their reelection chances are in jeopardy as well.
Do you think he may have successfully moved the Republican Party a little more towards the right?
Oh, I think so. I think there's no question. With the help of the good numbers that are coming out.
Okay.
His plan is being seen as succeeding, and that's important. He could talk a lot of things, but if things weren't improving, he'd be in trouble. But the fact that things are improving is better for his stance. All right, much more ahead on this Monday edition of Focal Point. Fred, Jeff, and Rob sitting in for the vacationing Brian. We'll be back right after the news.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.
Secular progressives in the United States have worked to alter the very nature of our republic.
For the progressives, there are no longer any God-given natural rights.
AFA Executive Vice President Ed Vitagliano helps you understand the progressive threat to the American Republic. Get your copy of this powerful DVD from the AFA Cultural Institute at afastore.net.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio, a ministry of the American Family Association.
American Family News on the Hour. I'm Chad Groening. A religious freedom victory at the U.S. Supreme Court in the case of a baker who refused the demands of a same-sex couple. Fox's Jared Halpern has more from Washington.
A 7-2 ruling sides with a Colorado baker who was sanctioned by a state commission for refusing to create a custom cake for a same-sex couple. Justice Anthony Kennedy, writing for the majority, concludes the Civil Rights Commission's treatment of this case has elements of a clear and impermissible hostility towards sincere religious beliefs, a violation of the First Amendment's free exercise clause. But the narrow ruling also leaves open future challenges that must await further elaboration in the courts without undue respect to sincere religious beliefs or subjecting gay persons to indignities. In Washington, Jared Halpern, Fox News.
President Donald Trump is calling the special counsel Russia probe, quote, totally unconstitutional. Trump tweeted on Monday, the appointment of the special counsel is totally unconstitutional. Despite that, we play the game because I, unlike the Democrats, have done nothing wrong. Trump's team has sought to discredit special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into Russia meddling into the 2016 presidential election. Police say a suspect in 4 Phoenix area homicides that happened in a 3-day period killed himself as SWAT officers entered his room at an extended stay hotel. Phoenix police say officers evacuated people near the suspect's room before they entered it early Monday morning. Shots were fired as the SWAT team went into the suspect's room, but police say officers did not fire any shots. The suspect was identified only as an adult male. North Korea's top 3 military officials have been removed ahead of the June 12th U.S.-North Korean summit in Singapore. Fox's Greg Halpott has more on that story.
House cleaning among North Korea's top military brass in advance of next week's summit involving President Trump and Kim Jong-un. Various sources confirming the North Korean leader has replaced his defense chief, the chief of the general staff of the Army, and the director of the Army's powerful political bureau, all with folks more loyal to him, less conservative, and a bit younger, although they're all still in their 60s. It's thought there's been some grumbling in the ranks over plans by Kim to meet with President Trump and commit to some form of denuclearization. It's also thought he wants a team he can trust and no chance of a coup while he's off on diplomatic missions, and even wants those willing to divert military manpower to economic needs and new focus of the busy young North Korean leader. In London, Greg Palcott, Fox News.
A report suggests an uptick in illegal activities against abortion clinics. But as AFN's Charlie Butts reports, an expert suggests it's unfounded.
The National Abortion Federation issued a report contending acts of trespassing, blocking clinic driveways, and violence have increased significantly. AFN talked with Sidewalk Advocates for Life Executive Director Laura Musica, who says pro-life counselors are peaceful and never intentionally break laws. And if the described incidents were occurring, they would be the first to know. But there's another factor.
You know, if our folks are successful in outreach, if they're stopping more cars at the driveway, even if they accidentally step back and put a toe over the line, they call the police. And so they're lumping that activity, even peaceful activities, they're lumping that all in with these other things that they claim that they've seen.
So that inflates the figures. What is really happening is the abortion movement is grabbing at straws, trying to find ways to interfere with the First Amendment rights of pro-life prayer warriors.
They're trying to find anything in our people, and sometimes the city attorney and the police are very pro-abortion, and so, you know, they might misapply a city ordinance to try to stop our people trying to find reasons to interfere with our peaceful First Amendment activities.
Invariably, when that approach is challenged, courts rule in favor of pro-lifers and against the abortion clinics and city authorities. Yet, the National Abortion Federation reports it as anti-abortion harassment. She says all in all, the study is highly suspect. Consider the source. I'm Charlie Butts.
Remember, you can access American Family News 24 hours a day, 7 days a week when you log on to the World Wide Web at onenewsnow.com. And that is American Family News on the Hour. I'm Chad Groening.
Exposing Washington with Walker Wildman.
So who is responsible for the dysfunction in Washington? That's what we're going to be discussing today.
We have become one of the most litigious societies on the planet.
The goal of this show is to bring clarity to the news coming out of Washington, D.C., and to expose the deception that has plagued our nation's capital for decades.
Exposing Washington.
Each Saturday at 2:30 p.m. Central.
On American Family Radio.
prospers when religion is vibrant and the rule of law under God is acknowledged.
An informed patriot is what we want.
Welcome to American Family Radio's Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio.
Muscular Christianity.
Where we relentlessly explore the intersection of truth and politics.
The trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so.
Now, here's your host, Brian Fisher.
And welcome back to the second hour of Focal Point for this Monday. Fred Jackson sitting in for vacationing Brian Fisher. And just to review the big story of the day, a decision by the United States Supreme Court, a 7-2 decision earlier today with regards to the Jack Phillips case. He's the baker from California who faced a major challenge like other Christian businesses have in various places across the country. In Jack Phillips' case, as a Christian baker, didn't want to bake a cake for a homosexual wedding. His case went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. 7-2 decision today in favor of Jack Phillips. However, it's being described by the legal community as a very narrow decision because the justice's basic and major objection was to the preconceived attitude of the Human Rights Commission there in Colorado. They were very hostile and open in their hostility to Jack Phillips' Christian beliefs. And that apparently, according to the justice who wrote the majority opinion, Justice Kennedy, was his major objection to that earlier ruling. So, as we were talking with Brad Dacus of the Pacific Justice Institute earlier, and also our own Abe Hamilton, our senior counsel here at American Family Association, both of them understanding that it was a very narrow decision, and you can expect that homosexual activists and their legal friends will continue to make those kinds of challenges. So we're thankful. We're praising the Lord today for some relief for Jack Phillips. But as we always say, we have to stay vigilant because the other side, they never give up. And we must continue to solicit the Lord's help in all of these battles and be encouraged that the Lord is on our side and come alongside those who are facing these kinds of battles. Just before the news break, we were talking about the fact that this is an election year. There are primaries around the country tomorrow, and we're getting set. The table is being set for the election in November, and how important it is. And we were discussing that many times in midterm elections, the party in power, many times the supporters, do not come out to vote. But this is another key election. Yes, it's not a presidential election, but it is an election that will determine whether Republicans continue their control of the House and Senate, or if the Democrats win, and they are optimistic that they can take control of the House and or the Senate. Senate being so important, again, going to our court system because senators control who's going to be on our court system. And we do believe that probably in the next year, perhaps it'll be Justice Kennedy, perhaps Justice Breyer, perhaps Justice Ginsburg on the United States Supreme Court will finally retire. And that'll open up another position. Justice Gorsuch, among the 7, obviously today, voting in favor of the Jack Phillips case. And so elections do have consequences, as we say here so often. You know, it's interesting. One of the big issues, of course, is illegal immigration, has been since President Trump announced that he was running for the presidency back in 2015, securing our border. I read with some interest late last week, they had an election in Italy, and we know what's been going on in Europe with regards to immigration. The European Union has a policy that if you make it to their shores, they're going to look after you, and it's been a problem. Italy's economy has been bad anyway, but part of the problem, it's been amplified by the number of migrants coming in, mainly from North Africa. But a league leader, Matteo Salvini, I believe his name is, says his first order of business as Italy's new interior minister is to revamp the nation's immigration policies. Salvini wants to reduce the number of migrants arriving, increase the number of expulsions, and cut the funds Italy spends tending to migrants. Doesn't that sound kind of familiar to you?
Yeah, it does. But let me ask you, what kind of challenge does he face from the EU with this? I mean, how much can he actually get done? That's the question that comes to mind.
Well, that's the thing, and I think, the politicians of the EU continue to defend their migrant policies. However, they are catching more and more protests from their own people, whether it's Germany or other EU
Poland,
countries, Greece,
Hungary.
Exactly. And the reason being they're finding their economy is faltering because these people are coming in from mostly Muslim countries, and they're living off the largesse of the land, as it were. And also the violence associated with that. We've heard the stories over the last few years of violence, abuse of women by many, in many cases, migrants coming into those communities. It's what, even though the British many times will not admit to it, but it's what Brexit was all about. The Brits wanting to get out of the European Union. A large part of it was the migrant issue in that country. So,
is it similar in Europe that they're actually the leaders of that country or corporations from that country are looking for cheap labor per se, as maybe a lot of corporations here are looking for immigrants to come in for cheap labor? Is it similar to that, and they're just not finding jobs or getting jobs? Or
well, if you think it's bad here, I think it's even worse in Europe because you can live off the government for a whole lot longer there.
So there's no real incentive to get out and start working.
But it is part of the problem. There is no question about that. And many times you're right as far as some of these immigrants are willing to work for much lower wages. So the thing with in Europe, the migrants are there legally, all right? So they have all of these protections.
Yeah.
The big issue here, of course, is illegal immigration and what must be done to stem that. And that's a problem that President Trump, as we were talking just before the break, is facing from his own party as we head into these fall elections, is trying to get his plan for a wall to be built to stop the illegal immigration, but also the John McCain's, even though he is at home in Arizona and pray for his health, but the John McCain factor, we'll call it that, because he has his allies that are in Washington that basically want amnesty. For those, in particular for the so-called DACA group.
Even though he ran on building the wall.
Yes. Yeah. So that's a challenge that the president is facing as we head into this election. All right, we'll stay with politics for just a moment here. Bill Clinton. We talked to him about the president back in the 90s.
Yeah.
He's back in the news today. He's kind of had this low profile behind his wife, Hillary Clinton. He's back in the news, and it's hard to figure out why he did this. He agreed to do interviews over the weekend with NBC in particular, and he was asked about the whole Me Too movement that's going on out there right now. It started, I guess, maybe with Harvey Weinstein, but it has blossomed. Major media characters have been thrown out of jobs because of their treatment of women. So, in an interview, I guess we have to go to a break, so I won't start that. But in an interview with NBC, the host put together the Me Too movement and how he was thinking about this with regards to his relationship with Monica Lewinsky. And he didn't handle the question very well. So that's one of the things we're going to be talking about when we come back. And also, Kellyanne Conway, one of the president's advisors, is going to give her assessment of the president. Today, June 4th, is day 500 for President Trump. So we'll get a report card from Kellyanne Conway on how the president is doing. You're listening to Focal Point on this Monday. Fred Jackson, Jeff, and Rob sitting in for Brian today. Back with much more after the break.
Here's Twyla Brace, president of CCHF, with today's Health Freedom Minute.
I have written a book called Big Brother in the Exam Room, The Dangerous Truth About Electronic Health Records. It's unlike any other book ever, and it will be on Amazon in a month. Privacy rights protect freedom. When Congress mandated that doctors and hospitals buy government-certified electronic health records and use them the way the government wants them used, the plan was to take over the healthcare system. As advanced readers have said, it's a very well-researched book. Computerized patient data is being used to build dossiers, intrude on private lives, control treatment decisions, and ration care. I hope you'll put the book on your summer reading list. It includes actionable steps back to freedom.
Learn more about protecting your healthcare choices. Sign up for the CCHF Weekly E-News Update at cchfreedom.org. That's cchfreedom.org.
Okay, here's the big question with regard to any big decision. Is this going to work? Well, if you've heard about MediShare, a brilliant way of sharing healthcare costs, you may have wondered that. Yeah, but does it actually work? So did Dr. Stuart Hoover, who initially joined to save a lot of money. The typical family saves about $500 a month. Stuart saved even more.
When we first joined MediShare, we were immediately going from a little over $1,600 a month down to $460 basically a month.
So that's wonderful, but then his wife needed emergency surgery. The bills added up to $160,000.
So we were seeing the bills coming in, and then the bills were being paid. Portions were being shared, and the end result of this is this bill was taken care of.
Yes, MediShare works, and it's so easy to get your questions answered. Why not? You can call right now. Just hit **345. That's **345, **345.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher on American Family Radio.
And good to have you back with us on this Monday. Fred Jackson sitting in for Brian on Focal Point. We're talking about Bill Clinton over the weekend, for some reason, agreed to give an interview to NBC's Today Show, which was actually released this morning. And he was asked whether he should have resigned 20 years ago for his sexual relationship with White House intern Monica Lewinsky, and whether the current Me Too movement has changed his perspective. Let's listen to what the former president had to say with that question. He's talking with Craig Melvin on Today's Show. Cut one.
In 2018, with everything that's going on with the Me Too movement, how would you have approached the accusations differently?
Well, I don't think it would be an issue because people would be using the facts instead of the imagined facts. If the facts were the same today, I wouldn't. You're asking, well, don't we have a right to change the rules? Yes, but you don't have a right to change the facts. So a lot of the facts have been conveniently omitted to make the story work. But I think partly because they're frustrated that they got all these serious allegations against the current occupant of the Oval Office, and his voters don't seem to care. I think I did the right thing. I defended the Constitution.
Well, that's called stick handling. It's a hockey term. And, you shake your head. What's he saying here? He dealt with the facts. Well, the facts of the matter were, and continue to be, that he had a sexual relationship with a young intern at the White House who worked at the White House, a 20-year-old. One of the issues being he's the powerful figure. He's the most powerful man in the world, politically speaking, and he has this young intern. Now, she admits that it was consensual, but that's not the issue here. The issue with the Me Too movement is these powerful male figures out there taking advantage of their positions with young women. And as you heard there from Bill Clinton, former President Bill Clinton, those are the facts, but he's not about to apologize for it. He tried to deflect to the current president and the allegations that have been made against President Trump, which the President Trump has said are not true. But it's not allegations when it comes to Monica Lewinsky. It was truth. And I mean, not to mention his history in Arkansas when he was governor there and Attorney General of Arkansas, and the ladies there who still say he did terrible things to them. But this is typical of President Bill Clinton. You know, you remember during his impeachment hearings, it depends on what you mean by the word is. You know, his play on words. But you know what? The mainstream media still likes him, despite his despicable behavior when he was president of the White House. And but I found it interesting, number one, that he would agree to be interviewed. And kudos to Craig Melvin for asking that question. I think it just showed once again the kind of individual that Bill Clinton is, Jeff.
Yeah, I was a little surprised. Who was the other individual in the room sitting with him? Was that a lawyer?
Craig Melvin was the interviewer.
Oh, no, I thought there was one other guy in the interview that I thought was maybe his lawyer.
He probably should have had a lawyer in there, but, you know, that's just the way Bill Clinton is. I think it runs between Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton. I mean, Hillary Clinton still can't believe she lost the election.
Yeah.
You know, it's just that it's like Barack Obama was quoted the other day as saying, you know, I guess I just did too much too early. The American people just weren't with me.
Weren't ready.
They hadn't caught up with me in my grand scheme and plan. Well, Hillary Clinton said, you know, it's just the election was stolen from her because people just weren't ready for her. You know, the basket of deplorables just didn't come around with her. I think it just runs in the family there. All right, as we said, this is day 500 for the President of the United States, President Trump, and we were talking about what has happened over the last year and several months in his presidency, economically speaking, great success. Kellyanne Conway was asked about the first 500 days in an interview on Fox this morning, and this is what she had to say.
I look at these jobs numbers. What I think people weren't ready for with respect to President Obama was Obamacare that has left 30 million Americans without health care. They couldn't keep their plans. They couldn't keep their doctors. This president has turned the poor economic jobs and growth numbers around from the last administration. He inherited an economic mess, and now we have, for only the 7th time since 1970, we have an unemployment rate this low. It is below 4%. It is extraordinary. And by the way, let's just run through a couple of those numbers that President Obama and President Clinton, but particularly President Obama, could never claim. Over 300,000 new manufacturing jobs, over 300,000 new construction jobs, job upticks in mining, job upticks in timber. We have fewer regulations, more optimism, an economy that's absolutely booming, and frankly, more respect on the world stage. The last president was given the Nobel Peace Prize. This president may actually earn it.
I thought that was a pretty good line from Kellyanne Conway. And what she was referencing there, of course, Obama got a Nobel Peace Prize, what was it, a matter of weeks after he became president for doing nothing?
Nothing.
And I wouldn't hold my breath on President Trump getting a Nobel Prize for anything because of the basically the animosity that's held for his conservative policies out there. But you know what? He's an interesting character, President Trump, in that he is a businessman and he hasn't given up on that approach. He's not a politician. And that just irks the mainstream media because they're used to politicians coming around and trying to curry favor with the media. And he just doesn't do that. And, you know, you take people like Jim Acosta at CNN and you compare. I was at a news directors convention last summer. It was out in California. It was the Radio Television News Directors Association. I hadn't gone to one of their conventions in years. And it was absolutely amazing. Here's what was their take. They recognize that the mainstream of America trusts them less and less. But instead of accepting responsibility, and the responsibility being poor reporting and opinionated reporting, instead of accepting that, they were blaming President Trump for using his Twitter account to go around them. That they saw as the fault in all of this. And yes, we can agree, I think, to a certain extent, that the president probably does say things sometimes that he should not. He frames his arguments in somewhat of a way that perhaps our diplomatic side would say, no, you probably shouldn't say that. But he is getting his message out there. He is using social media to go around reporters who are very politically biased against him, because we know what the surveys have said through the years, and this long precedes President Trump. I think Pew Research and others have said 90% of reporters out there vote Democrat. They love Barack Obama.
Oh, yeah.
Who was it that said on the weekend? I forget what it was. I think it was a Democrat who said on the weekend that Barack Obama received favored coverage from the media. There's no question about that. That they didn't touch him.
Was that Jimmy Carter?
No, it wasn't Jimmy Carter. It was somebody else. But they admit it, and they actually said it was because Obama is an African American that he received favored coverage because of that. It might have been Bill Clinton, I think. I think it was Bill Clinton that actually said that, an extension to that interview that we just played an excerpt from. But this president ideologically is the opposite of what most reporters are in this country. Most of these reporters are young, liberal activists who are globalist in their thinking, not nationalist, and this just irks them. And they're out to defeat this president. That's why they beat away. You know, I go to the gym a couple times a week. The gym has television screens up there in front of you. And it's absolutely amazing. CNN, and I'm not exaggerating here, folks, but almost every night they start their news shows, whether it's Wolf Blitzer or the people that come after Wolf Blitzer in the evening, something about Russia.
Yeah.
Still,
yeah.
Something about Russia. Oh, the other night, they went on and on and on about the fact that Melania Trump, they actually have a count going that one day last week it was 21 days that she hasn't been seen. Now, and I think it was Friday night, it was 23 days that she has not been seen, something of that nature. And she came out and said, I'm doing just fine. I'm doing the work of the First Lady here at the White House. And I think she was going to a Gold Star family event today.
Yeah.
She was going to that. But they're trying to put out this, they're undermining the president and now the First Lady in any way that they can.
Are they implying that they're not getting along, or are they
I don't know. I
just
mean,
leaving that open?
The First Lady just had surgery.
Yes.
I think it was a kidney issue, and, she did well, and she came home from the hospital. But, I mean, they're trying to plant these seeds of maybe there's something wrong in the marriage or there's something wrong with her health. But it's constant.
It's constant. At the gym also, CNN on one side, and on the other side is Fox. CNN bashing Trump the entire time.
Constant.
When a major news event was going on, there was some kind of bombing or something, and Fox was covering the bombing, and they were continuing just bashing President Trump.
I know.
It was just continuing.
I have a friend that claimed that he was healed by CNN, that he was in the hospital with some leg injuries, and the guests left CNN on the TV, and it motivated him to get up and start walking to shut it off.
That's funny.
Sometimes
that's what he said. I don't know if it's true or not.
At the gym, it makes me walk faster.
Yeah.
When I just have to take my attention off of CNN, and it's really sad. I mean, they have really ceased to be a news agency. When they first started CNN with Ted Turner, I mean, there was some legitimacy to their news organization, but they've lost it. They really have.
It's sad is what it is. And where would we know what Trump was even doing if it hadn't been for Twitter?
I know.
Because only us,
and Fox.
And Fox and Twitter.
Yeah.
That's the only way you know what, President Trump's doing.
I know. All right, listen, time to go to the phones. 888-589-8840. 888-589-8840. Your thoughts on today's Supreme Court decision. And also, we've been talking about the fact that this is an election year and what the outcomes are and what has to be done to ensure that a conservative agenda continues. Your thoughts on the Democratic Party and their problems with leadership right now. 888-589-8840. 888-589-8840 is the number to call. We'll hear from you when we come back here on this Monday edition of Focal Point. Back in a moment.
Hi, I'm David Barton, founder of Wall Builders.
And I'm Tim Barton, the president of Wall Builders. And we want to let you know about an opportunity this summer for 18 to 25-year-olds to come be a part of what we're calling the Leadership Training Program. Actually, the website is wallbuilders.com/leadership training if you want to see more information. But really what we're doing is trying to help young people combat a lot of the nonsense they're learning in academia, things that are anti-American or anti the Bible. And so we actually dig into the Bible, we dig into American history and the Constitution and education, and try to give a really good inoculation against some of the things that they're hearing in academics.
Yeah, Tim, you're exactly right. This is such an excellent opportunity to have the apologetics of the things that they'll face in academia and the culture. So if you're from 18 to 25 years old and you want training in this, and by the way, you get to actually hold the handwritten documents of George Washington and John Adams and other aspects of American history, this is a great opportunity this summer. 2 weeks. Go to wallbuilders.com/leadership training. Hope to see you this summer.
Here on American Family Radio, this is David Wolin with Haven Ministries, inviting you to anchor your day in God's Word. Discipline is always a contentious subject among parents. What's appropriate, and how do you impact your child at the heart level? How do you help them see their need for a Savior? These aren't easy questions, but speaking as a parent, I know this. Depending upon God daily through prayer and time in His Word is essential. My wife and I know that the discipline of our kids is only ours for a season. Ultimately, that role in their lives belongs to God. Hear these words from Hebrews 12. They apply to you and me. Do not make light of the Lord's discipline, and do not lose heart when He rebukes you, because the Lord disciplines the one He loves, and He chastens everyone He accepts as His son. Get Anchor Devotional delivered to your home at no cost. Visit getanchor.com.
American Family Radio. You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher. Video segments of today's program will be posted at afr.net and on the Focal Point Facebook page. You'll also find the best collection of Brian's resources on our Facebook page. If you're on Twitter, be among the very first every morning to find out what the day's show will be about. Just follow Brian at Brian J. Fisher.
Brian J. Fisher.
Brian J. Fisher. Anybody know what the J stands for?
John.
Is it John?
I think it is Jonathan.
Jonathan.
I think so.
Jonathan Fisher.
Good question. We've worked with him for 9 years now and never really asked him. You know?
I think it's Jonathan.
You know, the main reason he started including a lot of that, apparently there's a musician out there named Brian Fisher, spelled the same way, and he was tired of getting all the tweets that were directed at Brian J. Fisher, so he had to insert the J just to make that distinction, having a heart for the other Brian Fisher.
All right, Fred Jackson sitting in for Brian J. Fisher. Joining me in studio, Jeff and Rob, as always. Hey, listen, we're going to go to our phones, 888-589-8840. In just a second, we have the calls lining up there. So, but I wanted, coming into work this morning, I heard about the volcano in Guatemala. But the story, the headline was, Israel gives aid after Guatemala volcano erupts. And Israel was amongst the first countries to deliver food, blankets, and medicine to Guatemala in the wake of this volcano which erupted, and at least 24 people have died there. But Guatemala also, in the wake of what the United States did in moving our embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, Guatemala has done the same thing. And we were talking about this morning. What is it about Guatemala? You haven't, at least I haven't, put Guatemala and Israel together before the embassy story came out, and now this. So I kind of find that quite fascinating. We were talking about it. I'm not sure whether there has been, through history, some migration of Jewish people maybe to Guatemala.
I don't know. I know that it's not unusual for Israel to be some of the first teams into disaster relief. They tend to. I remember when I worked with Friendships, the Israelis were already there in Haiti after that earthquake. They were one of the first ones in, and they do fantastic work. And we also saw the story of the camp that they've had on the Syrian border. They've been helping Syrian refugees, and it was all secret for a long time. They didn't make a big show of it, but they wanted to help. And most of the supplies, Fred, are not coming from the Israeli government. Israeli government is providing the protection. It's the Israeli and Jewish citizens that have a heart for helping the people of war and in disaster relief. So,
but that story doesn't get told very often.
No, we get the photos from the Gaza Strip, and there's there's a narrative. An international narrative against Israel, that's for sure.
And they've got to be good at providing relief in situations like that because they've dealt with it every day.
Good point.
You know, I mean, every day they're dealing with that. So they have the abilities to take care of people in those situations.
Amen. Pray for the peace of Israel. All right, let's go to our phones. And let's go first to Michael in Missouri. Michael, welcome to the program. Go ahead.
Yeah, my comment was in regards to the court ruling on the baker and had the pastry shop and the wedding cake in Colorado.
Uh-huh.
And I'm a Christian, I'm an ex-Marine, I'm a patriot, and I thank God that they ruled in his favor because I tell you what, under 8 years of Obama, there was nothing but nonstop attacks on Christians and our faith. Mm-hmm. And being an ex-Marine, I'm not silent like some of them. I stand up for what I believe is right. If it's biblical, I stand up for it. And if it offends anyone, I don't really care. I stand for the truth and the scriptures, what the scripture says, you know.
Yep. You know, I think an important ingredient in standing too is there are a lot of, I think, nominal Christians out there, but I think Jack Phillips and others, Barnell Stutzman, they are Christians who understand that sometimes you have to pay a price for what you believe. And I think that's often, you know, the case. This is a Christian nation, and there are a lot of people who have an idea of what Christianity is all about, but it's the true believers that are not going to let opposition stop them. And that's, you know, as we were talking about earlier, when it comes to Jack Phillips and Barnell Stutzman and others, the Kleins in Oregon, they love these people. They love these people who oppose them. And they demonstrated that over and over again. But they also demonstrate that God's word has not changed. And how God feels about sin has not changed. And that is what they're willing to do. I mean, the Bible is filled with examples of Christians, believers, who had to take a stand for what they believe. The Christian life, once you start down that road, is a road that you're going to face opposition. And as we get closer to the Lord's return, I think that opposition will increase. So you have to know what to believe, but you have to know why you believe it and to be willing to stand on it. Mm-hmm. And Jack Phillips is one of those. And as we talked about, it is a narrow decision, but nonetheless, 7 of the Supreme Court justices ruled in favor of Jack Phillips today, and we can celebrate that. Jim, in Alabama, I believe it is. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon. And I've just been listening to the broadcast while I'm on my way to the hospital. I have to say, being a liberal, as y'all so many times want to put it out there, I just hear liberal, Obama. I think you can tell by the gist of where I'm going that I am a liberal, and I do side with the gentleman that the Supreme Court narrowly protected his constitutional rights. I don't agree with it, but I definitely agree with what they did. I know it was a narrow victory. It's a painful victory for some of us because in spirit we don't follow that, but we have to follow man's law when we're on this plane. I just wanted to say that and say God bless y'all. I'm a liberal and I love y'all, and I hope we can find some common ground someday because it sure sounds like we're weaponizing this stuff.
Yeah, Jim, thank you very much. We appreciate liberals and conservatives who listen. That's a good call. We appreciate that. He said he was on his way to the hospital, so I think and hope everything goes well for our caller there. Rebecca in Texas. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Hi, calling from the great state of Texas. Just want to comment, on all the discussions today about the Supreme Court ruling. I think it's fantastic. But I want to point out, as I listen to your radio program day in and day out, it always occurs to me that I think there's a certain amount of persecution that we as Americans or American Christians are just going to have to face to get us out of our complacency and up off our couches. When we hear about cases like the Masterpiece Bakery case, it just is so egregious and so outrageous that it compels us to take action and do something, to write our congressmen, to pay attention to, who we're voting for in our local elections, even down to our school boards and our city council. So, I'm so thankful that AFR has this program so we can keep in touch, so we know what's truly going on, so we can take action.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate your comments about making ourselves as Christians aware. And it does take, and I agree with you, Rebecca, it does take incidents like the Jack Phillips case in Colorado to make us aware that we should not take these freedoms that we've enjoyed in this country for so many years for granted, because, Satan's crowd, we'll call it that, is out to take those freedoms away. The liberals who say they celebrate tolerance and diversity, only to a point. In reality, they are out to extinguish any opposition to what they have, and that was the concern certainly in the legalization of homosexual marriage back in 2015, is that Christian freedoms would be taken away, and we're seeing that across the country today. Now, many times, one thing I think we have to be clear about, sometimes we get these court rulings, whether it's against, prayer in our schools and that sort of thing. Very often it's just an activist judge. We think, that the majority's against us, the mainstream media, so they report on these cases, and it sounds many times like the opposition is we just can't overcome it. But we need to be aware that sometimes the minority has a big megaphone, and we get discouraged by that, and we ought not to. But I think our caller, Rebecca, and I appreciate what you said, become aware, but also become active. And whether it's getting the action alerts from the American Family Association to keep aware and to put your vote in on that, be aware politically of where the candidate stands on things. We're coming up to an election this fall. Query your candidates on where they stand on these major issues. Ask those candidates, if you're going out to a meeting tonight, what about the Supreme Court decision today? What do you think about that? And but you have to know what's going on in order to ask the right questions to these politicians and hold them accountable. And as our caller also said, I believe sometimes it involves us getting involved with your school boards. Many of the problems today, folks, start in our education system. We have good Christian teachers out there and Christian principals that are trying to run the schools as best they can according to Christian principles, but many times our education system, it takes the lead when it comes to drawing children away from what they've been taught at home by Christian parents. And that's the other thing I tell people. Find out from your kids what you're being taught in those schools. And if you don't like what's being taught, voice that concern to the school, but also the next time there's a school board opening, maybe you ought to think about running for that school board. Let's try to get in one more call before we take a break. To Keith in Michigan. Is it Keith?
Yes, it is. Actually, it's in Lansing.
Okay.
So about your story about the farmer at the country mill.
Yes.
Yeah, he's back to selling his wares over at the East Lansing Farmers Market.
Okay. Well, good for him.
And, yeah, and so I just got to say, go State. So for East Lansing. So the one question is, why did the Wolverine cross the road?
Okay, why did the Wolverine cross the road? Go ahead.
It was easier than crossing the goal line.
Oh, man.
Go State.
All right. Very good, Keith. You stuck that one in there. Very good on you.
That's the risk for taking calls from all over the nation. You never know what you're going to get.
That's just fine. All right. Got to take a little break here. 888-589-8840 is the number to call. We're not dealing with sports today, but he stuck that one in there. Supreme Court decision in favor of Jack Phillips, 7-2 decision today. More reaction from you when we come back here on Focal Point on this Monday. Back in a few moments.
Target continues to allow men into their women's restroom and changing areas. Will 2018 be the year Target reverses this dangerous and reckless policy? The American Family Association will continue to work toward the goal of convincing Target to reverse its misguided policy that places women and children at risk. Protect your wives, daughters, and family. Don't shop at Target. Join the over 1.5 million people who have signed the pledge to boycott Target. Visit afa.net.
What Solomon is saying here is, remember, God is in heaven and he sees everything. You are on earth and your vision is very limited. If you could see what God sees, you wouldn't be saying what you're saying. That's what Solomon is teaching us.
Join Dr. David Jeremiah for his series Searching for Heaven on Earth next time on Turning Point.
5:30 a.m. and 7 p.m. Central on American Family Radio.
80% of the time, an abortion-minded mother who views an ultrasound or sonogram of her baby will choose life. Here's the story of Candace.
The sonogram sealed the deal for me. My baby was like this tiny little spectrum of hope. And I saw his heart beating on the screen. And knowing that there's life growing inside, I mean, that sonogram changed my life. I went from just Candace to Mom. Thank you to everybody that has given these gifts. You guys are giving more than money. You guys are giving love.
There are currently preborn centers which do not have an ultrasound machine. Would you sponsor a machine today? Dial pound 250 and say keyword baby. That's pound 250 and say baby. Or go to preborn.com. That's preborn.com. Your love could save a life.
American Family Radio.
You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
Focal Point. Brian Fisher.
And we are back in this last segment for the day on this Monday. Fred Jackson sitting in for Brian. 888-589-8840, as we've been talking about throughout the program today. The United States Supreme Court decision ruling in favor of Baker Jack Phillips in Colorado, who was told by the Human Rights Commission there that he had done wrong by not being willing to sell a cake to two homosexuals for their wedding. It's a case that has great similarities with other cases across the country. Supreme Court saying today that what they disagreed with was the open hostility of that Human Rights Commission in Colorado, and that's why we're calling it a narrow decision. They really didn't get into the religious rights of Jack Phillips as much as they condemned what these commission members had to say openly in their ridicule of Jack Phillips during that public hearing. So it still remains to be seen how our Supreme Court will rule perhaps in similar cases down the road, but we can celebrate this 7-2 decision today. All right, let's go back to our phones to Oklahoma. And Joe, welcome to the program.
Yeah, hi, Fred. How are you today?
I'm doing really well.
Listen, I wanted to share something with you guys and your listeners, my take on this Jack Phillips case. I was very much surprised when the Supreme Court made their decision, and I thought it was kind of a good decision in that it was a 7-2. That's not even narrow.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that we're all going to be better off whenever the judiciary realizes that gay rights just simply does not exist. It's a fraudulent thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to teach the Constitution, and like I was telling you, call screener there, I used to teach a class on it, and I haven't seen a single word in the Constitution, not so much as a syllable, that confers rights of any kind to anybody based on their sexual behaviors.
That's right.
And when they're trying to force Christians to accept this lifestyle and to kind of sign off on it, if you will, then they're forcing us to violate what the Apostle Paul tells us in 1 Timothy 5:22. Are you familiar with it?
5:22. Go ahead.
Yeah, the Apostle Paul says, "Do not share in the sins of others."
Mm-hmm.
So, I think that the homosexuals have never been able to fit into society. So now they're trying to force society to fit into them and justify what they do. That's all I had to share with you guys.
No, Joe, that is exactly right, and we have known that for a long time, certainly constitutionally. No sexual behavior. No, I heard Pastor Robert Jeffress of First Baptist Dallas in a debate with a homosexual, or a pastor who says he's a homosexual, let me put it that way. And Pastor Jeffress, of course, this pastor who was a homosexual was saying that he was born that way, and that homosexuals, and that God is approving of that because God made people homosexuals. And Pastor Jeffress made this point, which was excellent. All sexual behavior is a decision. Whether you are a heterosexual or whether you claim whatever you identify as, every sexual act is a decision. So you have a choice. And nothing in the Constitution guarantees you the right to make a choice for immorality, to make a choice for sin. And that's the point that was made, and I thought that was excellent. So our caller is exactly right. No constitutional right to practice your sin. Mac in Georgia, go ahead.
Thank you, Fred. First of all, I'm thankful for that the Supreme Court decision, the day of court.
Mm-hmm.
The whole thing is, if I'm not mistaken, Supreme Court cannot make laws. There is no legal same-sex marriage as I speak.
Mm-hmm.
Congress has to do it. How come people can't realize that? If they listen to Brian Fisher a little more, they'd learn something.
That's right.
I don't know how many times I've heard Brian say that. Now, I've not read it, but I'll take that to my grave. I believe Brian.
Yep. Well, it's not only that Brian is saying it, it is true. It is the Congress that is given the right to make laws. The Supreme Court is there to uphold laws that are made by Congress and passed and signed into law by the president. That's the way it is. But here's what has happened, and this goes to what we were talking about before. Elections have consequences. In recent years, we have had presidents who come in who nominate people and put them on the Supreme Court or other federal courts who are activist judges. They are people who believe that the Constitution, as they describe it, is a living document. In other words, who cares what the original authors of a law said? We're going to make it apply. This has been going on most recently with regards to the president's decision to restrict the number of refugees who are coming into this country. And we had federal judges basically saying, well, because of what President Trump said on the election campaign, we believe he's anti-Islamic, therefore, to restrict people coming in from certain terrorist-sponsoring countries, we think that's illegal. Well, that's nonsense. The president has the constitutional right to put those restrictions in place with regards to national security. He's allowed to do that as the president. But there are no laws that the president is. And now you have cases where people are going to court they say that the president doesn't have the right to overturn the executive order of President Obama allowing young illegals to stay in this country. They're saying that the current president doesn't have the right to extinguish an executive order made by a prior president. That's nonsense. Executive orders are not laws. They are executive orders. So our caller is exactly right. That the justices, the judges, are supposed to be there to uphold existing law. But we've got these activist judges now, and I think President Trump is trying to change that, to have strict constitutionalists on our benches who make rulings according to the laws and the intents of the laws. All right, time for another few calls. Let's go to North Carolina, and John is on the line. Go ahead, John.
Yes, good afternoon. Appreciate y'all's ministry.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a real blessing. I wanted to make a comment about Israel and Guatemala moving the embassy to Jerusalem. My father was Guatemalan and came to the States shortly after World War II, lived here 16 years, graduated from the military academy in Guatemala, and he shared with me that during World War II, Guatemala kicked out the Germans from the country, confiscated their businesses, etc., and then opened the doors for the Jewish people to come to the country.
Wow.
My dad owned a farm in the central highlands of Guatemala, and some of the roads that were built, they were rock, made out of rock. They were for packs of mules, and Germans owned farms in those areas and built those roads. And so, anyway, I thought it was really interesting what my father had shared with me. I don't know if it's true. I haven't gone back to verify anything, but you know, the president of Guatemala, I understand, is a born-again believer. Right now, Guatemala, about a third of the country are evangelical Christians. So, you know, God has done a great work in that country.
That is absolutely fascinating, John. Thank you for calling, because a lot of us have been wondering ever since this embassy story started to break, and then after the United States decision to move it to Jerusalem, like Guatemala, and people said, well, why would Guatemala, why would they do that? Because a lot of people have never made a connection between Guatemala and Israel. But that's fascinating, John, that story that you've just told us. And I think I have heard about the leader of Guatemala being an evangelical Christian. And as many evangelicals, they support Israel because of the Abrahamic covenant. They support the Jewish people because they are God's chosen people. They need Jesus Christ as their Savior. We do not debate that. But they are still God's chosen people, and God is not through with the Israeli people. And I go back to the Abrahamic covenant of Genesis chapter 12, that I will bless those that bless you, Israel, and I will curse those that curse you. But that is absolutely fascinating. Continue to pray for that relationship. I believe it was Honduras is another country, too, that has agreed to move their embassy. I may be wrong on that.
Not sure.
But that's just fascinating. We have time for one more, Rob? Yep. All right, let's go to Oklahoma and Tommy. Tommy, welcome to the program. Go ahead, sir.
Oh, thank you for having time for me. I just wanted to make a comment about the church.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a liberal caller who was a Christian and in disagreement. And he was in agreement but disagreeing because obviously he feels differently about marriage and homosexuality and what is redeemable under God. And my point is that the churches now are pointing out, everybody is screaming about how we have to be light. We have to be light. They forget about the first part of that. We have to be salt and light. We have to be a preservative unto the earth.
Right.
Unto the truth of God. And if we want to bow down as a church and be fully acceptant of something that is an abomination unto the Lord, then let me just do this really quick.
I think we have to run here, Tommy, but you make an excellent point. Scripture calls upon us to be salt and light.
Amen.
And salt irritates.
Yeah,
it preserves, but it irritates sometimes too. And sometimes in love, we do irritate, but we ought not to back down.
One quick note before we go out. Also, Guatemala was one of the first nations to recognize Israel as a nation.
As a nation, back in 1948.
Yes.
Fascinating. All right, learned something today. I hope you did too, folks. Been great to be with you. Been fun to be with you. Sitting in for Brian today. Jeff and Rob, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Always
Thank you,
good,
Fred.
Always good to be here. And Lord willing, keep on listening to American Family Radio.
Happy birthday.
Thanks.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast do not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.
American Family Association. We're here to inform, equip, and activate individuals to strengthen the moral foundations of American culture. Whether it's praying, signing a petition, or emailing leaders, your involvement is needed every day. Because your immediate involvement is crucial, making it fast and easy is crucial as well. Now you can subscribe